Welcome to Cut the Boring Parts. I'm Catherine Sullivan. I'll be moderating this panel, and I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Walter.
Hi, I'm Walter Hunt. I'm a science fiction and historical fiction writer. I write for Bain. My most recent Bain book, which is 1636, The Atlantic Encounter, which I wrote with Eric Flint. My most recent solo is City by the Bay, which is about a Russian version of California in the 19th century. There's a reading from that about 5:30 this afternoon, 5:30 Eastern, so 4:30 in Minnesota, which is like Canada. And I'm just glad to be here with friends and colleagues.
I'm going to go clockwise, so Shari's next.
All right. I'm Shari. I write as S.N. Lee. I primarily write young adult fantasy, but I write a little bit of everything else as well. And I have a reading from, let's see, angle, there we go, from Something Familiar that was posted yesterday and should still be available. And it's chapters 5, 6, and 7, where you get to kind of get into the story and meet the characters a little bit more. Yeah, and I am, like Walter, really happy to see other people outside my tiny little bubble.
And Tyler?
Hi, Tyler Tork, local author of science fiction, fantasy, steampunk, some nonfiction. I'm working right now on an update to a website development book for authors. My most recent publication is The Deep End from Agma Creative Media, which is a steampunk mystery adventure, poison stabby things, intrigue with metaphysical components. So that's been fun. And yeah, I am happy to be here, and I'm just waiting to get questions.
Okay. And Steve?
I'm Steve Miller. I'm co-author of the Liaden Universe. That's what I'm most famous for, I suppose. I've been writing science fiction professionally since 1970s. And Sharon, my co-author, went over some stuff the other day and said that we've had 3 million words published in the Liaden Universe alone. And that doesn't include the stuff that we've written that hasn't been published yet. Most recently, it gets confusing for us because we write and sell chapbooks through our Pinbean books, and we just had one come out, and I was sitting here thinking, well, where is it? But I don't have my copy, my paper copy here to flash the cover. We have 6 million, 3 million words out there. The latest was, gee, Catherine, did you remember our latest one? It's the latest novel that came from Bain.
That's Trader's Leap.
Yeah, it was Trader's Leap. We just finished 2 other things that got turned in this week, and I've been proofing. So I get confused about where are we. We're sort of ahead and
feeling
ahead and behind. But I do hope you'll be patient with us as we've got all these things to work through. And I have some experience in the field. Before I became a novelist, I was also curator of science fiction at the University of Maryland, where my job was to collect books and art. I had to go off to science fiction conventions and buy art and be on panels and get paid for it.
Cushy job there. And I'm Catherine Sullivan. I write middle grade and YA science fiction and fantasy. The latest one is a re-release of Crystal Throne. And going to the description of the panel, cut the boring bits. Writers are told they need to cut out all the boring bits. But boring to whom? Those who like every last detail of a ship or weapons? Those who want only action? What about the quiet bits of world building? Should they stay or go? So, panelists, we'll start with Walter and go clockwise around again.
Oh dear.
What is your feeling on this topic? Before we start getting to the nitty gritty.
Well, if you're not a professional writer, which we all are, if you're not a professional writer, you get this feeling that you get to the end of the story. You write a draft, you get to the end, you write the end, and you think, well, that's the end. No, it's not the end. You always have to go back, and you always have to decide what's relevant and what's not. Not merely from the point of view of what furthers the plot. But do I really need to do this info dump here, or do I have to have this dialogue, or how many, as you know, Bobs am I going to permit myself? And very often that's very revelatory. It tells you what you were thinking at the time may not be germane to the story. Now, the world of writers is divided into plotters and pantsers, and I'm a pantser. And very often I find that I'll have written something not knowing why it was there, and it turns out to be extremely relevant. But probably just as often, I'll have written something that I thought I needed to have there, and it turns out to be irrelevant. I would merely say that that you have to cut not only the boring parts but the irrelevant parts when you go through and edit. You have to be willing to do that. What my friend Lawrence Schoen calls killing your darlings. You have to do that. You have to be willing to say this doesn't matter. This can go. Then you save it somewhere on your hard drive and you use it later. It's always available.
Sorry? Need to turn your sound on.
Could you repeat the question for me? My brain's kind of foggy this morning.
What is your feeling about the topic before we start getting to the news?
Okay. I'm one of those writers who really enjoys the editing almost as much as the writing, because it gives me the opportunity to make the story better before anyone else sees it. It's something that takes practice, learning to identify which pieces are the boring stuff, because something that I might find terribly fascinating, a lot of people are not going to find terribly fascinating. And so I have to kind of think about, who am I expecting to want to read this story, and what are they going to find interesting, so that I make sure that the pieces that I cut are not the parts that are going to be most interesting to the audience. They might be the things I find interesting, but yeah.
Tyler?
Yeah. When you use the word boring, I think that applies more to the writer than the reader, because what I'm looking for is, if I'm feeling bored while I'm writing it, then I know that something is wrong, and I need to back off and look at how the story has come together and why I'm writing this scene. But from the reader's point of view, it's not so much that they're bored in the sense that they get the feeling that they're not doing anything meaningful. It's more that they don't see value in that particular part, and so it becomes harder work for them and breaks them out of the narrative. They don't feel immersed anymore because they're skimming ahead for the things that are interesting them, or else setting it aside. So I prefer to think of it as, how do we give value to the readers so that they don't come across blocks of text where they say, I don't care about this part.
That's a good point.
It's kind of interesting, because my assumption was that we were going to be talking about in great deal the fanish response, and not the fact that we need to edit. Edit is just part of something that you're always doing anyway.
Let me get to that.
Because we have I first saw it explicitly at an Albacon. Sharon was on a panel, and somebody in the audience went to the entire panel and said, well, tell me, not only you, Sharon, but tell me, why is it that you put in all this boring stuff? Literally said that. And the complaint was, all this dialogue. And the real complaint at that point was, the person wanted the science, wanted more and more and more of the science, and thought that in effect, the storylines were all just too frittery. There was too much stuff going on, and they couldn't concentrate on the science.
So I guess they're not like a Jane Austen fan.
Well, probably not. And I think most of the people in the audience were stunned. We had quite a few professionals there, but we were kind of stunned. And worse was that other people, or some of the other people in the audience, were agreeing that we were having too much. And for example, we put some romance in our stories, and so people would say, okay, the romance doesn't fit. On the other hand, the romance is why the characters that were interacting with each other were interacting with each other, so we thought it was pretty important. But the the what's boring and what isn't has a wide range. If I'm boring my editor, I'm in trouble. Yes, that's true. If I'm boring my editor, I'm probably in trouble. Uh, we have had the experience of having an editor call us up. It was like midnight. Said, "I've just read the first line of this new book." I said, "Yes." "This isn't what's really happening, is it?" And I, and we're like, Steve, this was Steve Pagel, just the first line. Well, I read the whole first scene, and I need to be sure before I go further that they didn't. Nope, they did. And he said, "I'm going to be reading all night." Okay, if you've got that kind of a situation, then you're probably okay. But the when a fan tells us, and we've seen this especially through the magic of the internet, when a fan tells us, "No, we don't understand why you have to have this," and we think, this thread is 17 books long. It would be really good if we're allowed to get through here. And okay, maybe they've only been reading for 2 books or something, but this thread has been going on for a long time, and we need to deal with this. And if it needs to go about here, there's no other place for it. So sometimes there's more going on than just the story, the words that are immediately in front of you. Not only for the reader, but not only for the writer, but for the reader if they've been attentive. If they haven't, well, I'm not sure what we can do about that.
Yeah, in the 1632 universe, the universe of Ring of Fire, um, it's like if somebody says to us, "Well, I'm not interested in hearing about all this historical stuff." It's like, okay, how do we phrase a world set in the 17th century without giving you the historical stuff?
Yeah,
That
it
being that
seems
being
like they're reading the wrong series.
right, but that
It,
being said, it's important, and I'm guessing Steve would agree that regardless of what the readers expect or desire, you have to tell a good story, or it doesn't matter. You have to tell a story that's good, and that means figuring out what's relevant to the story and what's not. Like you're obliged to give the reader a good ride. I'm hoping he agrees.
Okay, speaking from a reader's point of view, uh, I encountered this idea back when I was rereading Lord of the Rings for the empty nine time,
Mm,
and I noticed that I was starting to skip past all the description that I'd read many times before and just getting to the action scenes. But we can do that in books. Why are people insisting that the writers have to skip all the important parts? We don't know what the readers are really interested in.
good point.
yeah, maybe if we color coded the different sections.
Oh no.
So anything that's pink is a description. You can skip it. There's some action here in blue.
Because it makes up the story. It's like, okay, there are some authors who's like, okay, I'm going to skip all the pages of the ships and the weapons and get to this particular part, but I can do that in a paper. And since the author go do this because it's important to the story.
And I think this kind of reflects on what Walter said about our job is to write a story, to tell a story. And the story isn't going to be complete without some world, some description, some of the things that somebody may not be interested in. And so, one of the beautiful things about reading fiction is that you can choose to skip over things. My son has no interest in romance, so he's like, "Oh, romantic element, just skip past that. Okay, looks like we're past it. Excellent. Keep moving." Um, and he can still enjoy a book, like, and he can still enjoy the same books as me or my husband or his friends, and he can talk about them, and he just doesn't read the romance part. So as far as he's concerned, there aren't romances in the books that he reads, so he's personalizing his experience.
That's
How
interesting.
old is he?
He's 14.
Okay.
It is, of course, more work to read a book that way. And this is what I was saying earlier: is you want to limit the amount to which the reader is thrown out of the narrative because they're engaging with the text and trying to figure out what's the next bit they're interested in, which is why, you know, I like to, if something's not moving well enough, if it's not making enough progress in the story, what I like to do is look at all the bits of it and consider them, each part of it from setting a character and a plot standpoint, and make sure that everything's doing at least double duty, so that there's a reasonably good chance that someone who's reading that passage is getting something out of it, even if they're really not that interested in the setting,
Mhm.
or if they just want to see things blown up and don't care so much about character development. Um,
Does that
so,
require you to think as a reader rather than as a writer?
well, yeah, I think to serve the readers, you have to be able to approach it from that perspective, and sometimes that means setting it aside for a while. I am gifted with a very short memory, and so I don't have to set it aside for very long before I can come back to it and wonder what the hell I was thinking. Uh,
Nice.
but yeah, but that's a good exercise to look at some of your writing and just say, yeah, what is this? Is this just setting? Is it just character? Can we combine them? You know, can the character be, the dialogue tags that involve action are one of my favorite things for mushing some things together, because people seldom are just talking, they're doing something at the same time.
Steve? Anything?
I, I'm still working with the how much work is the reader doing, but I I don't usually see reading as work, and but I haven't since, you know, I think I got tested in the fifth grade and they decided I was reading at a college level, and so I've been I what I did when I was a kid, I had an accident and my mouth was sewn shut for several months and then had to be rebuilt. So I couldn't talk to people for a long time. And so I took all my communication from reading. My brother could understand me when I spoke, but he was the only person that actually could. And so I read intensively from the time I was in second grade on, I guess. And I just do it. You know, it's I snarf the words up. And if something is in there that I need to skip, I'm still reading 1,000 words a minute or whatever it is. So I can get through pretty quickly anyway. And I do, so I think I don't read that way. I guess somebody who's a slower reader and who really has to work at the reading, has an entirely different process. And I don't know, I may well lose those people as readers along the way. Um, I don't think I do. I don't think we have too many people who throw the books against the wall or anything. But my experience as a reader being what it is, I have a hard time dropping back to that other level, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, we can't please everyone,
No.
No.
and if we please ourselves, that's a good start.
I try to please my wife. I will read excerpts to her, and if she starts rolling her eyes, but if I keep her engaged for 2 or 3 pages, if I read a scene, I say, "What do you think of this?" And she goes, "Ooh, what happens next?" I don't know. I haven't written it yet. But she's a good sounding board, and having somebody you can reading aloud also gives you a feel for what, um, whether the text flows or not. Like that sort of runs in the face of Steve's experience, but I tend to I like to read aloud to her or to others, and see how it sounds, see how it sounds coming out, especially dialogue or a scene where there's something happening as opposed to narrative. I like to read it aloud.
Reading aloud is part of my editing process because I think as somebody who does read very fast, I don't catch some of the grammatical or punctuation, the typos and stuff that are in a work unless I'm being forced to acknowledge every element that's there. And when you read it aloud, you're kind of forced to acknowledge every um, typographical symbol that's on the page. And
Sure.
I find I catch more mistakes, and the phrases and sentences that are too long or awkward, that I know what it's supposed to say, so I don't need to catch every word, but somebody else who didn't, create the story in their head is going to be like, wait, what happened, and fall out of the narrative. So yeah, that reading aloud can be really handy from a editing standpoint.
I agree.
And Steve, since you've got co-author.
Well, that's the thing. Sharon and I are back and forth in a work frequently, and I'll finish. I'm working right now on the first of two books in that bringing back Jeffrey, a character who's been very popular. It was a surprise character. He kind of popped out one day and said, "You better write me." And we wrote a short story, and the next thing we know, he had a novel, and now he's working on his third and fourth. So anyhow, I'm working on this, but when I'm done a section, it goes to Sharon, and so she can come back and she can point out to me that this very strange ship name has now appeared in 3 different forms in the last 4 pages or something. At the same time, we read very differently. We've both been editors for newspapers, and we've both done that kind of work. So we do tend to catch up each other's errors in those cases. Before it gets to this is a final draft kind of a situation. In a few years ago, we ended up writing because of a lot of strangeness. We ended up writing 5 books in I think 14 months, and Sharon was working on a book that was a hardcore, not quite pornographic romance series, alternate world romance series, while I was writing about Theo Waitley learning how to get along in what was about 9th grade. And then we'd switch, at the end of the day, we'd switch off our what we had written that day. And, it's like whiplash, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But that did help us catch a lot of errors. I think I have a concern about some of the readers who want more backstory every time something is presented to them, every time a concept is presented. We gave a reading at the Reisterstown Public Library some years ago, and a young woman came up and said, "But I didn't know what this word was, so I stopped reading because I didn't want to have to go look it up." Wanted us to explain regular English words. They thought that we were. She thought, and I don't remember what the word is right now, but it was a regular English word that's in the dictionary, and was afraid it was one of those sci-fi things.
Oh, wow.
And that and there's only so much explanation you can do, and that became a boring part because we were using vocabulary that was too. No, seriously, that was.
How do you answer that?
That you're using words that are too hard.
There are words in your book. This is a problem for me.
Oh yeah,
actually,
like this container's full of ingredients. Holy crap.
But it comes to that sometimes, and that becomes for some people that's apparently a boring part. We have, and we're not going to have somebody who's a leader of a major clan talking to a leader of another major clan. "Hey, y'all, dude, what you doing?" No, we're not going to do that. We're going to be speaking very seriously. We're talking about clashes of planets. They're going to have some language, and the language they're going to have is going to be that of educated, etc. people.
You have a right to vocabulary, Steve.
Yeah.
I think there are times when that whole you're not going to be able to please everyone, and that's a definite extreme of you're using, and I kind of feel this way about your earlier concern about, you know, how dare there be story in this story? There's too much story in your story. And words. You have too many words and too much story. And you're probably some people, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to fix that for you. Because that's, you know, your story's going to be a story. It's going to be full of words. And
We
yeah.
did have an editor insist that we had too many characters in a book and made us take out a thread. And it took us 3 books to recover
Oh,
because
ouch.
we needed that. We needed that story. We had a 7-book arc planned, and it turned out that was preparatory to having that particular house drop us. So she wanted it to be a trilogy rather than part of the larger series that we had intended. So we had to take the thread out, which meant really we had to then write 2 books without that information in it, and then go back in. But writing in a universe rather than writing in a simple chronological series let us do that. But we have had editors tell us, no, there's too many characters. And we've had editors tell us there's too much action. So, you know.
Yeah, big universes have advantages and disadvantages. Again, in 1632, we have lots of characters. We have lots of characters, and we're constantly using them. But in Atlantic Encounter, in the first 1632 book set in the New World, set in America, we had a whole plot section that took place in Boston, and Eric Flint, who's the the Tsar of 1632, he said, we got to this point, and he said the story dragged for about 6,000 words, and so he wanted to have us arrive in Boston and then leave and say, well, we've had enough of those assholes, because they're Puritans, right? So we took it out. So we basically excised it and wrote around it, and we're including the part that I wrote in as a section, a novella in another book.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
That can sometimes work.
Right, but it streamlined the entire story, and it did improve it a great deal. And Eric's got a good eye for that, so that's how we addressed it. But because it's a shared universe, we were allowed to do that.
Did you title the story "Why We Thought the People in Boston Were Assholes"?
I've forgotten what we decided to call it. Basically, if I may, for an aside, it's an expedition to the New World. By 2 uptimers. There are people who've been sent back to the 17th century. That's the premise. And, so they're coming to the New World to sort of warn primarily the English colonies that the French are coming, because of David Weber, they've been sold to the French. So they refuse to listen to them and think they came through the Ring of Fire, and therefore they're servants of the devil. So we decided it was important, but not important enough to contribute to the story. So we provided background information, and we dumped a little info in the next chapter. But it worked out pretty well, and I think the novella works well too. So we have the guys, John Endicott and 2 uptimers floating in a balloon up the Connecticut River, and he says, well, the Yankee fans on one side and Red Sox fans on the other, and Endicott says, what?
Tyler?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that.
What can you do after
basically,
that?
when I've got a beta reader, so those times when I think, well, maybe I've got too much information here or not enough, I can usually run that section past beta readers and going, did I skip something that I think I might have read?
Beta readers are super helpful.
Oh gosh, yes, especially when they understand what you're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice a difference if you're doing first person versus third? That maybe that you can get away with more stuff in third person that you couldn't on first, or other way around? Whoever wants to chime in first.
I so very rarely write in first person, so I'm not going to be able to really speak to that one. I'll defer to others.
I sometimes do write in first person, but I guess I hadn't thought about it in that sense. I mean, it seems to me that it's the same considerations either way. It's just who's saying them.
The usual problems. In first person, if you're telling in first person, you have to make sure that the first person doesn't know something that the first person could not have known. Whereas in third person, you have the omniscience of the narrator, and you can fiddle around with that. I mean, each form has its own advantages and disadvantages. I did an entire novel in first person, and I kept saying, well, I'd really like to bring in this plot element, but there's no way that the narrator, the first person narrator, could possibly know, so I can't. Dang. To find some other way to do it.
It does allow you to bring in some little bits of information in a way that also illuminates the character, though. To if you're writing in first person, because for instance, I have a character in one of my books whose father is a tailor, and he's not that interested in clothing himself, but he can't help but pick up stuff. And so when he meets people, he especially notices their clothes and whether they're well fitting and of quality material, even though he is really only interested in automobile engines himself. But he sees that stuff, and that's part of the character.
Sure, that's that's a good point. People color their perceptions by their life experience, and that allows you to make that part of the story.
Steve, look like you wanted to say something.
Well, I think the first three short stories, no, three of the first 5 short stories I sold professionally were first person, and I stopped after that because I was getting into longer works, into novellas and novels, and I don't do the short, the first person in the larger works. It just didn't work out that way. It may have had something to do. I had a long conversation with Roger Zelazny at one point, and he was talking about the difficulty he had had with doing all of the Amber books in very short order, because he wrote them very, very quickly, and he wrote the first one with the intent of selling 7 at once, which at that point wasn't being done. He essentially invented the whole we're going to have this huge story arc thing for science fiction and fantasy, and aside from Lord of the Rings, of course. And he had been talking that one of the books he'd had to recast because it started off was as he put it, it was too much I, and it was very difficult for him to do what was being what Walter was explaining about knowing too much and needing to have some way to suck all that information in, and so he changed his approach for the next books, and I think that helped me because I just said, maybe I shouldn't be doing that at all. I'll just go ahead and write in third, and that's what I've done. And I think Sharon has mostly also written in. She occasionally will do it for her fantasies. She'll drop into first person, but not in the works that we're doing together.
Yeah, I think it has to do with how you want to present the story. I basically start, if I have a new idea, I write however it seems comfortable. So the first mesmerism book, Elements of Mind, is first person, whereas Harmony and Light has different plot threads, and it's all third person. The third one I'm doing third person, but I did Song and Stone in first person because it felt right. You gotta figure out what works for the text, and being familiar and comfortable with each style, I think helps. But do what works for you, right?
We have a question. Is it reasonable to just fire readers like that? The ones who object to having vocabulary or who object to having dialogue or development? I guess it more depends on who buys the books.
They fire us.
Yeah.
I've had this come up online because I post short stories on in a couple of different places online. So I've got a Tumblr blog, I've got a website, and then I've got some up on Curious Fictions. And on Tumblr, people tend to be the most engaging. Like they'll reach out and talk to you sometimes because they loved something and sometimes because they hated something. And what I have found in cases like that, what's most often the issue is that I'm not writing the kind of story that they want, and I'm not going to be able to write the story that they want because I'm writing the story I want to write. And there are people who enjoy the story that I want to write, and that maybe I'm not the best choice of an author for them. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it's an art, and art is, not universal. What I'm going to enjoy, Kathy may be like, oh God, that's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And, so there's going to be art that one of us just doesn't get, and somebody else finds it to be the most profound. And the same is true for writing. What's going to work for one person isn't going to work for others. There's no universal right way. So I try to couch it in terms of, well, I'm sorry that my stuff just isn't a good fit for what you're looking for. And depending on how rude or polite they are about this, there's too much story in your story, or whatever it is that they're not liking, I may try to direct them to something. If they're articulate about what it is they do like and what they're wanting, if I know of something that's more in vain what they're wanting, I can direct them in that, say, oh, you might like this person's work instead.
Yeah.
Maybe go check their stuff out. Because I don't want to be, nasty to people, but I will definitely be more helpful to the people who are like, oh, I would have liked this more, but who aren't rude and
Yeah.
obnoxious and
I
entitled.
want to put it even more strongly than that. Not only is it okay to not try to please everyone, it's mandatory to not try to please everyone, because you can't, and it'll just spoil the story and no one will enjoy it. I mean, getting back to Jane Austen, okay, if what a person really wanted to read was stories of naval adventure, which the Napoleonic Wars were happening at that time, right? And so people were out on the sea fighting battles and things. And if someone complained to Jane Austen and said, "How come there aren't more naval battles in your books? This is what I really want." It would have been a real mistake for her to try and satisfy that, because that's not the story she could have done well.
Yeah, Steve, while you're doing all this space politics, why isn't there anything about the Regency in it? I mean, holy cow. Everybody likes the Regency.
Well, the funny thing is, of course, is that there is.
Well, yeah. Okay, well, why
Just
is there more,
disguised.
there aren't enough Regency romances with robots in them. Although nowadays, who knows?
He's got the AI ships.
That's right.
Yeah.
We also we come from a background of reading the Regencies, and a lot of the Liaden mannerism and stuff it comes from the novels of manner, the stories about. So we get to play, and this is an important thing for us. We made an agreement when we started writing together that if it wasn't fun for us anymore, we weren't going to do it. And that was our agreement. And while we're working together, if it's not fun, if we can't enjoy it, whatever, we're not gonna do it.
Doesn't pay well enough to do if it's not fun.
That's right.
And the problem that we have sometimes, though, is that somebody will have decided from their reading that the next book is going to be about this. And they get in, and we have the character they expected, but the character is doing something entirely different, because the character is character driven, not driven by that reader's expectations.
How dare they?
And we have had people who apparently flounced away from us because you were supposed to have this character do that. No, he'd never do that. That's not who he is. Well, that's what the expectation was. So you get okay. I'm not firing them. They're walking away, but that's okay. We can do without somebody demanding that one of our characters, who happens to have some TK and Psi abilities, take over somebody else's mind and force them to do something.
That wouldn't be them.
Nope, not going there. And that expectation had been there. Why? I don't know. Maybe they watched too much of our good buddy who says to you, "Tell me, what do you really want?"
Mr. Morden.
Anyway,
I don't think I'd ever fire a reader but I've probably been fired by readers. Okay, moving on.
Yeah. Because there are many books out there, they have their choice of what to buy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I have a good friend, fellow writer in the Boston area. Hates Lord of the Rings, movies, books, hates it, just despises Tolkien. Okay, fine, not for you. You don't have to like everything. You don't have to be liked. When I'm approached about doing panels, they say, "What do you want to do on panels?" And I say, "I'll do anything except Harry Potter, Doctor Who, vampires, and anime." Not because I find any of them reprehensible. It's just there are lots of people who like them better and are better experts on them. So rather than having me be disparaging or indifferent, find somebody who knows something about it. So give me stuff that isn't those things. My daughter and I have had this long-standing thing about Harry Potter. I said, "Well, I read it through once, and it was all right." He said, "No, it was great. It was." No, it wasn't for me. I respect that it did well. I'm Mazel tov, right? But
Yeah.
not for me. But it's spawned all kinds of interest in reading, and that I respect. That I admire. That's good.
And it brought back a lot of the wizard books that have been out of print for a number of years, like Diana Wynne Jones.
Sure.
That's great.
Yeah,
Sure.
and
But if somebody says,
Ken,
"What's your favorite, fantasy?" I'll say Earthsea. I'll say, I will say Tolkien, but or others or Amber for that matter. But I don't have to like everything, and I don't have to have everybody like what I write. It's okay. As long as I keep getting contracts, I'm fine.
it is okay.
It is okay.
I don't see any questions in the chat. So anything panelists would like to discuss on this topic?
Throw us something dramatic. Yeah.
I think one of the places where a lot of writers, especially early on before they've identified how much story, either backstory or world building needs to go into something, one of the spots where they get fouled up by including too much of the boring stuff is thinking that you need to fully develop the world, having all those info dumps, we talked about this, I think last night, or came up, the, punishing the reader with your research. Um, those are things that tend to show up more when writers are newer at the craft. And those are things that are more universally needing to be edited out, where it's like, yes, you need to establish the world, but we don't at this particular stage need to know anything about the currency or the exchange rate between this country and that neighboring country. That doesn't actually show up until page 403. The placement of that world building and backstory and the volume that's included, I think those are some things that tend to universally be boring if you're confronted with the info dump, and need to be edited or revised or trimmed or moved.
Yeah. Bob problem.
Yeah. If you go into great detail about the gods and then they never appear in the story, you don't need that section.
What I try to do myself to avoid situations where there's a big chunk of explanation that throws the reader out of the story is to make a distinction for when the information is important and when it's relevant, which is a lower bar.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to tell the reader about it the first time when it's important, because that seems like cheating. If you can tell them about it when it's relevant, when it's something that's going on in the scene, this is an okay side note, but the scene doesn't depend on it. The information's in their head, and then when it becomes important, they've got it. And that way, it's seamlessly part of the story, and it's enough back there that when it's important, they say, "Oh yeah, I already knew that."
Mm-hmm.
And that would be called foreshadowing. In many places.
I don't think it's quite the same thing as foreshadowing.
because you get it to the but you get it to the people, and yes, having it in their brains ahead of time is a good way to is a good way to do it.
Right, but if you just tell them when it's not important, they're not going to remember it anyway.
Well,
I'm thinking about the people that we do who seem to be demanding info dumps, and again, maybe it's a certain set of readers or people who's people of a certain age, because we have found again, I mean, maybe they only come out to libraries because it seems like the kind of question we get at library appearances, but the expectation that everything about a character has got to be dumped very soon on them. And maybe there's a style of book that does that, but they want all of this major information lump before they go further.
Well, there is a style of book that does that. Douglas Adams does that, doesn't he? He has these long sections of exposition, and and he makes them charming. You know, he has these paragraphs and paragraphs about how the universe works and all zany stuff.
Sure,
and
and
there's no story going on.
John Fowles in French Lieutenant's Women has lots of narrative that is just background. Moby Dick, God knows, is full of. What do you want to know about the whaling industry? Well, let me tell
but
you.
that's not sprightly or interesting.
No, but I mean, there's a certain model where you do that. I'm constantly reminded of the 300-page speech in the middle of Atlas Shrugged. Now, I'm not gonna hold Atlas Shrugged up as a great paragon of writing, except it's sold millions of copies. So what the hell? But that has. There are examples of enormous amounts of background information being dumped, and there are ways you can do that. You can have an encyclopedia entry, or you can have what's the thing at the beginning of the quotation at the beginning of a chapter called? There's an official name for it. Steve would know. I'm putting you on the spot, Steve.
I see that.
Yeah, but you put that sort of thing.
I call it the quotation at the beginning of the chapter.
Well, right. But you can put something in there that the reader goes, I wonder why that's there.
How's that going to be?
Yeah, John Brunner did that in Stand of Zanzibar and in Sheeple Cup. He'll have an encyclopedic entry or a quote from someplace, and you don't know why it's there. And then 3 or 4 pages on, you go, oh, that's why it's there.
That's not
why it's
the Galactic Encyclopedia Galactica.
I think footnotes are underused. You could put no underused, because you could, if you've got this, but a lot of people are going to say this is an interruption in the story. You can put them all in footnotes, and
in a novel.
Sure, why not?
Yes,
Walter Scott got away with it. I wouldn't.
Yeah. And I myself am a type of person who cannot pass by a footnote without reading it, but that is not typical, I think. And a lot of people can skim right past that. And if it's the type of person who really wants to know all those details, they will read the footnotes.
Terry Pratchett had the footnotes.
Terry Pratchett's footnotes.
Now, a lot of middle grade books of fantasy usually will have a glossary at the end and explanations as to why this particular food group is included. But that's the middle grade because they are interested in those little odd things.
Sure.
My first editor at Tor told me no glossary.
Glossaries are kind of inconvenient, but if you're working in digital medium, I mean that does give you some opportunities, because then you can have a link in the text, so that if it's a word or something that you wanted to find somewhere, it's an effective footnote. They can touch it and see the definition.
Sure, fair enough.
And the League universe always had a few.
We have had all kinds of things in the back of the book for people, and however much we put in the back of the book for people, somebody decides that we haven't put enough back there. And we have had some books where we looked at it and said, okay, this is due tomorrow. I'm not pulling that information from 3 other books and throwing it into the pile and this time around. But right now there happens to be a Liaden wiki online, which has 233 pages worth of information. And
Great.
so
You
if you
can,
really
you can
need
link
to
to that.
and our fans have put it up and they maintain it. And if they say this is an interesting thing and they're going to write a page, put together a page about it, then good enough. So you just go ahead and, but again, that's not as accessible as it ought to be for people who've got pages who are not working digitally.
Right.
I was one of the original stream of people working in ebooks, and when I say this, I'm not talking. I'm talking about in the 80s.
Really, yeah.
In the 80s, we were publishing ebooks, and then we wrestled with the ability to try to make links and stuff, and it was much harder then. Uh, it was really a pain to do it because there weren't all the programs that would just drop things in and stuff. It was before page definition languages had much gotten beyond the newspaper stuff. And I think that helped us not go to wanting to be able to have everything linked in a book so that people can do it that way. Yeah, we'll put it in the back. And a lot of people do the pronunciations from the back, and a lot of people do that. That's fine. Knowing how the words sound is important to us, so we hope that it's important to the readers, for example. But if it's not, they can read right past it and just say, well, that's gobbledygook said this. Okay, that's fine. However, that's
Name that starts with an N said this.
yes.
Well, and I think, if you have an audience that wants, more of the backstory, more of the character development, and you want to write it, but maybe it doesn't go into the novel because you've got people who aren't interested in that stuff, and so you've got a little bit of both. That's where you can make, the tie-in short stories and novellas where it's like, okay, a lot of people really want to hear about how this character broke their leg when they were a kid because it's referenced later and it's a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to write that story, and whether you put it in a collection or post it online, it is a way for you to provide that if it's something that you're interested in.
Oh yeah, we have had so many. If you're not familiar with our background, we've been publishing chapbooks since the 1980s. And those chapbooks have been, I don't know, what are we up to? Chapbook 32, I think we just published our 32nd chapbook, and that's 64 or 75 short stories that go along with the universe. Some of them are novellas, some of them are short stories. We're quite willing to deal with all this when we have time, when we have the chance, because there's a lot of stuff that can't go in a novel, and we have to know it in order to write the next one. So if while we're investigating it, and several of those short stories have ended up as novels themselves. So.
And Jason Tucker has a nice comment. I hate to sound like kids today have it easy, but kids today have it easy and they still complain that things aren't spoon fed to them. It's like they don't have an immense database at their fingertips all the time, which is a good comment, Jason. And true.
Sure. Which leads to the "you got this wrong" problem. Don't worry, you'll always get something wrong, and somebody will come up to you and tell you got it wrong at a con.
Oh,
That's okay. It means that they bought your book.
hey, that's true. And they read it. They paid
And they
attention.
read it. Yes.
We had somebody write to us some years ago who was a lawyer, and he wrote to us to tell us that we had made an error in a reference to the Leaden Code of Proper Conduct. And we really sat there for some time looking at this letter thinking, are we going to answer this guy or what? Because he wrote on his professional letterhead about this, and we were able to find the single reference that we had done previously and wrote back to him and said, look, this is what it says here and here. And he wrote us an apologetic letter and then went online somewhere and apologized to us in public for having doubted and thought that he knew the Leaden Code of Proper Conduct better than we did. But we did demand his copy. We wanted his copy of the code so that we would be able to pursue this better in the future. And at that point,
Yeah, which edition are you reading from there of the official code handbook?
Yeah, it was an amazement. But yes, people will tell you that you've gotten things wrong, and they are sometimes correct, but
Well, yeah. Yeah, I think what Jason is more complaining about though is that he thinks that people are getting lazy and not wanting to look things up. And
like vocabulary.
yeah. Well, I think it depends what they're interested in. You know, I know that I know several young people. I have nieces and nephews, and um, and the amount of time they spend on activities like Minecraft and things like that, which I think are mind-numbingly boring, they put a ton of work into that.
Mm.
And you know, it's really all about where your passion is, and looking up words might not be part of it. And also, you know, people uh, have a higher standard for that because they know what's possible.
You're entertaining
Mhm.
my wife, Tyler.
That's actually one of the things I like about writing for young adults is that they actually don't expect to know all the words all the time. And if they don't know a word, they don't let it stop them. They just keep going. And if it keeps coming up, they're like, I really need to know this word, then they'll look it up. Otherwise, they'll try to infer from the context, what does this mean?
They
And
will
so
learn to read.
it's nice that, uh, while I'm not trying to talk so far above, what their reading level might be that they are lost, you know, they don't mind a word here or there. They don't mind when they don't understand everything in the world.
Yeah.
And we've got about 4 minutes left. Panelists, you want to mention where people can find you? Or you've got Walter, you've got the reading later on, so we'll start off with you.
Okay. You can. I do have a website which is currently offline, but I write for Bain Books and for Ring of Fire Press and for Wordfire Press, and you can find me on Amazon or any other reputable bookstore. And I will have a recorded reading at 5:30 this afternoon from City by the Bay. It's a story called Unshakable Faith. So I hope you join me to hear that, and it encourages you to be interested in my modest display of talent.
And Shari?
Um, this is actually my last panel event, and I'm going to be, hanging out on Discord doing some writing sprints if my brain fog has lifted adequately, until I have to go teach Girl Scouts about screenwriting. Um, but you can find me online on Tumblr or on my website, s-n-arley.com. So that's it.
Tyler? Have you got a
My,
reading today?
what?
Have you got a reading later today?
No. I did reading yesterday,
Yeah.
but through the magic of the internet, it's not too late to attend the reading. But anyway, yeah, I'm done with live events for this conference, but I'm always available online at tylertorque.com. That's the central connecting point to all of my online presence. And I encourage people to go there and buy my books and write reviews, lots of reviews, even bad ones.
Well, you can find Corval.com, Korval. Corval.com is one of the main places you can find information about the Liaden universe. You can look up Liaden universe in quotes on the internet, and we're Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. And generally, you'll end up at a place where you'll get connected to us. There's pinbeambooks.com, which lists the chapbooks that we publish ourselves electronically. And many of those are now also available as paper books through the magic of Amazon. And we have a website called splinteruniverse.com, and Splinter Universe is a place where we share the little splinters, the odds and ends, the edges of stories and things from time to time. And occasionally they make their ways into books too. But Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, look it up on the internet and you'll probably run across us.
Okay. And MarsCon is still continuing to happen all weekend with events on YouTube, Discord, Twitch, and Zoom. More details can be found at marscon.org. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for
Thank
audience who's
you.
attending.
Thank you. Thank you.
Don't forget
Good
to
see
check
you
out
all.
the charity auction is still going on. There's still Girl Scout cookies, right?
Yep.
Okay. And there are other events coming on this weekend. Hope to see you guys next year in person.
Yes.
Will
hope
be
so.
good.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Catherine. Bye.
Bye.